An important moment for Chinese diplomacy. 2.5 months after switching diplomatic ties from Taiwan to Beijing, Honduran President Xiomara Castro embarks on an official visit to China at the invitation of Chinese President Xi Jinping. During her 6-day trip, both countries unveiled the Honduran embassy in Beijing after China inaugurated its embassy in Honduras last week. A large Honduran business delegation wasted no time in getting a tete-a-tete with their Chinese counterparts. Now, Honduras is signing 19 cooperative documents with China today, including a memorandum of understanding on joining China's Belt and Road Initiative. So what does President Castro expect to accomplish by visiting China so soon after switching to Beijing? What does it mean for the Latin American country, China, and the province of Taiwan? What message is the U.S. likely to take away from the trip as Central American nations, one after another, ditch formal ties with the island province? Welcome to a special edition of The Point, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Liu Xin. I'm pleased to be joined from Wuhan, Central China by Renato Peneluppi, a Brazilian entrepreneur and researcher, from Shanghai by Niu Haibin, director of the Institute for Foreign Policy Studies at Shanghai Institutes for International Studies, and also from Shanghai by Professor Josef Mahoney, professor of politics and international relations at East China Normal University. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. So let me go to Renato first. As I said, her visit happens actually sooner than most other countries which have cut off official ties with Taiwan. For instance, 9 countries have in total switched diplomatic ties from Taiwan to Beijing since Taiwan leader Tsai Ing-wen took office. And this time it took the Honduran president only 2.5 months to come to China. Why do you think she made it happen so soon?
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Basically, what we're seeing, it's a election promise. So she's fulfilling the project that she proposed. During her election, Xiomara promised she would fight corruption, she would fight poverty, and she would change the diplomatic relations with China. And that's the step she's doing. And from this change of diplomatic relations, she already opened new doors for business to flow, and for this new situation of learning how to fight poverty, as she was stressing. What we see here is she's searching for investments in infrastructure. She's changing, also looking for exchanges of technology on the farm, and open market for their farms too. We got to remember that 7% of the population of Honduras is in the poverty situation. So she's really willing to find these conditions of dialoguing with China, build conditions to make this transition. Well, what we see also, it's in the region, we have this, most of the countries that still not having diplomatic relations with China in Central America and Caribbean islands. So Honduras can be changing the whole region, it can be open a new trend in that area, and also getting closer to the BRIC banks, and she already applied for it. So it seems like a sign from the developing nations.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in greater details, I mean the New Development Bank, but I want to read out a tweet she sent out before she embarked on the trip. She said, and she said in Spanish, the translation would be, at the invitation of President Xi Jinping, I will visit, she said, with special mission, the People's Republic of China from the 9th and 14th of June 2023. The refoundation of Honduras demands new political, scientific, technical, commercial, and cultural horizons. Professor Niu, how do you look at her expectations for this trip when she calls to visit China with a special mission and also opening new horizons for the country? What do you think she's expecting on this trip?
Yes, I think this Twitter message is clearly express her expectations of her trip to China. As he mentioned with Shanghainese officials, she explained clearly what is a special mission. She said her trip is going to have development opportunities for the country. I think this is a key message because Honduras has many trade partners, including the US and Taiwan, but they can only offer some kind of aid or loans, but not the real development partners. So she wants to have China as a strong and comprehensive development partner. When she mentioned the other dimensions of the relationship, the science, technology, politics, I think this is her new vision to reflections of the country's previous development model. She mentioned that in the new development bank headquarters, she said the country's old past cannot help the country to overcome the challenges of the poor, the poverty, and the lack of the development opportunities. So she wants to look for other successful stories, such as China's development model, to have more lessons to learn to help the country to go a sustainable path.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Professor Mahoney, let me go to you. You are also living in Shanghai, as Professor Niu just said. Actually, she did she had quite a itinerary in Shanghai. She visited the headquarters of the BRICS-led New Development Bank. She visited a research center of Huawei. Why do you think the itinerary is arranged in that way instead of coming to Beijing first? To remind our audience, when Brazilian President Lula da Silva visited China, he also went to Shanghai as a very important stop. What is the significance? Why so?
Well, I don't know why she stopped in Shanghai first. In Lula's case, he was attending the inauguration of the NDB with his old ally. But I think the key word here in her tweet, go back to that, I'll link it to your question to me. This term refoundation is a key term for her. It's refundación is one of the key words in her political party name. And so in so much as we talk about China being in a new era, driving towards reaching the high point of national rejuvenation, she is also trying to express a new era. You know, they had diplomatic relations with Taiwan going back to 1941. And it's clear that Honduras has been stuck in a development trap, in a poverty trap, and it needs to really establish a good, strong relationship with China. It has a strong relationship with the United States. It continues to have one, but it needs to have a strong relationship with with China in order to have the benefit of being strongly connected to the world's two largest economies. Now, I agree with my colleague who said that what she really needs is more investment. And she's not seeking the sort of political oversight or the sort of conditions that are now being imposed by the U.S. For example, don't use Chinese tech, don't use Huawei, so forth and so on. She's also interested in the Belt Road Initiative. She's interested in infrastructure development. These are the sorts of projects, again, as my colleague mentioned, that the United States is not capable or willing to provide. But also, like Dilma Rousseff, the current head of the NDB, the former president of Brazil, she's a leftist, and I think she sees some sort of common cause and seeks solidarity with this new institution, the NDB, because she's optimistic that it can help her country develop and escape this cycle of poverty and crime.
Mm-hmm. Renato, what is your take of the fact that Honduras, on the very first trip of its president to China, actually mentions it wants to join the BRICS-led New Development Bank? What do we know about this bank and the motives behind which that Honduras is talking about this application, what does it mean? What does it say about Honduras' aspirations for this bilateral relationship?
That's actually an important question. Once what we're seeing from the Lula visit and now from Xiomara Castro visit is that Shanghai is becoming, because of the NDB Bank, a new multicultural center for this multipolar based institution. So the BRIC banks is becoming a new way to finance a new way of modernization. So the Chinese modernization is finding an open path for new institutions in a new global order to be open. I don't think it's a global order to dispute, but to have choices. As she well spoke in the conversation with Josef, and she said that they are looking for a new way to finance development without bringing them or guiding them to misery. And that's one of the paths that institutions, financial institutions from the past used to transform those countries in development. They used to propose conditions and ways that you would not guide them for a sovereign nation or even for a real development, but for conditions of more impoverishment and more trouble. So I think the MDBs opened this path, and Dilma Rousseff there as a new president of this new development bank is open a new process of development for the world, where nations has options. The South-South relation and the South nations, they have these conditions to build up, and especially as my colleague before said, we are building ways of taking Honduras to out of poverty. So they're looking for that. That's one of the key points that they want to work on.
Renato, let me stay with you because you are from the region. How much is her wishes, her ideas for the vision shared by the people of Honduras and by possibly other countries in the region who are considering similar balances, who are faced with similar challenges of poverty, for instance?
Yes, actually, this is a old dispute in South America. We've been suffering from this poverty and this subdevelopment conditions for quite the generations, and we also suffer a lot of influence for our big brother in the north. So this condition has been coming from coup d'etats and other conditions from the past, as the state of Honduras has suffered in the past. So Castro, she comes from a tradition of resistance, of trying to change the country. So in the 60s, when they have the coup d'etat, and she got into politics in the 70s, and then again with her husband in the beginning of 2000s. So she's been building up this momentum of changing. So her position, her proposal, her actions here in China really represents the willing of its people. And the whole region is trying to find this path for quite long. So slowly you're seeing South American countries taking the same lead. Take, for example, Paraguay. The leader of the last election didn't win, but he was also proposing this change of status in the relation with China. So I think there is a open path for a new way of globalize, and those nations in the South, especially Latin American nations, their own select dialogue with China, it's gaining strength, and nations like Honduras is guiding and pushing other nations to see this as perspective. And as my colleague said before, it's not that they're denying US or competing US, they're just choosing the best conditions from themselves. So there is more options now for our development, and we will embrace the best one.
Professor Niu, let me get to you. What exactly can diplomatic ties with China bring to countries such as Honduras in terms of development, in terms of growth, in terms of poverty alleviation? We were seeing pictures, footages of banana growers, coffee plantations, and so on and so forth. But right now, bilateral trade is actually quite small, 1.6 billion US dollars, and China is exporting much more than it is importing from Honduras. So exactly what kind of opportunities are there for the Honduras economy?
Yes, I think the diplomatic tie will explore the great potential between the two countries. Even just established the diplomatic tie, there are some early profits have been achieved, such as Honduran products, coffee, banana, has been open to the Chinese market. And with this trip, I think there will be more institutional arrangements come out, like the bilateral FTA negotiations maybe, and also the Belt and Road Initiative. These institutional arrangements will bring more attention from both sides to focus on the all sectors cooperation. I think the Chinese enterprises will help the country by increasing investment in different sectors of the country. Even before the diplomatic tie was established, there was some investment of Chinese companies in the sectors of energy, digital infrastructure. I think these things will continue, but also more investments will go to the tourism, ports, highway, and also this kind of things. The investment will help the country to enhance its export capacity to China, then will make the trade relations more balanced.
What does having diplomatic relations with Honduras mean for China and Chinese people?
I think this is also important from the other perspective, because for China, Honduras is a great civilization and also a very attractiveness of the tourism, and it is also an important country in Central America. As you know, there are many Central American countries are still maintaining ties with Taiwan. So with more and more countries from Central America to establish a closer tie with China, I think more countries will follow this, like the Panama has done. I think Costa Rica, these two countries have given a two good example for the regional countries. And also, I think,
have those countries which have switched ties from Taiwan to Beijing, have they reaped benefits from diplomatic relations with Beijing? Professor Niu, once again.
Yes, I think President Castro is following the previous successful examples like Costa Rica and Panama. These two countries are being very dynamic relationship with China, and they have been attracted a lot of investments and business opportunities to the countries. So I think these good examples encouraged President Castro to make the strategic decision to establish diplomatic ties with China.
Professor Mahoney, now some international media are saying that China has managed to, quote unquote, lure away 9 of Taiwan's former partners with a campaign involving billions of dollars investments. For instance, CNN writes that China has spent much of the past 40 years attempting to isolate the self-ruled island democracy by chipping away at its diplomatic allies with offers of economic support. How do you see it? Is that an objective and a fair way, accurate way to describe Beijing's intention?
You know, I think there's a lot of mixed messages here. On the one hand, China is looking to have positive relations with all countries in the world. This isn't a zero-sum game in terms of Chinese diplomacy. China makes this clear again and again. Also, China is seeking positive economic relations with the countries that it has ties with. It's the case, it's certainly the case, as Professor Niu was saying, that countries in Latin America that have established diplomatic relations with China have seen benefits. But it's also the case that China did not go in and suddenly make these countries rich. So there's this argument that there's this dollar diplomacy, but then in fact, we don't actually see China making those commitments or actually spreading money around that way. We see China making strategic investments that will pay off in the long term in terms of win-win scenarios, but also in terms of being able to serve projects like the Belt Road Initiative or the BRICS Development Bank. But the other issue is, if we look at the Taiwan issue, it is in China's interest to cultivate ties, positive ties with countries that would otherwise be recognizing Taiwan as an independent country. We know very clearly that Beijing is opposed to Taiwanese separatism and opposed to Taiwan being recognized as an independent country, as Honduras formerly did for 80 years. So that is a diplomatic win. That is in the interest of Chinese sovereignty and security. And but I don't think we have to look at it as something that was purchased. In fact, both sides have made it clear that there were no preconditions. And when I was looking at a lot of the press, one of the things that I was trying to ascertain is that we know that the ties with Taipei were broken, but we also know that Honduras is a member of a free trade group involving Taiwan. And I've seen no reports that that has been disrupted. I've seen no reports that Beijing has insisted that that be disrupted. So it could be, again, a win-win-win situation at this point for Tegucigalpa and likewise China.
So, Renato, help us understand your understanding, basically, of the situation in the future. There will still be economic ties, cultural ties, informal ties between Honduras and Taipei, but in terms of diplomatic, in terms of official ties, there will only be one government representing the whole of China, like the 182 countries in the world have done. Again, 182 countries recognizing Beijing versus 13 countries still remaining which recognize Taiwan officially. What is your take on the situation going forward?
Yeah, my take is exactly what you're putting. I think I see a change on the political status, but the economic status tend to remain the same. As my colleague just said, like, economy must keep flowing. Everybody's looking for give a new dynamic to the economy. So we have a new chapter in this relation between Honduras and China, to facilitate a new sort of business, to open business. Like, I think the world is coming through a crisis that precede COVID. Like, we come from 2008 and now like with COVID. So this process of crisis is still going. So the nations need to cooperate more. Belt and Road comes as an offer, like as a condition for that. And like, I think those nations, when they solve this, this principle, they start to open new channels for new discussion. The secretary of the president of Honduras, he defined pretty well. He said, we hope to be open a 100,000 years of good relations with China, so we can prosper it all. And again, as my colleagues has been putting, it's a win-win situation where everybody is building up a new economy that needs to flow. We are all been suffering a lot from the decoupling or this trying decoupling and this destabilization of political situations. So this is a good sign for the nations of the world to find new paths, to build up, and to, from this point, build a new economy.
Well, the United States is definitely not very happy to see the Honduran president in China. Actually, before the trip was made, before she won the presidency, the U.S. Department of State actually warned about so-called unfulfilled promises from China. Professor Niu, what kind of implications does the opening of official relations with Beijing have for the United States in the region? What is the U.S. fearing losing now?
I think the United States is feeling very disappointed about this decision, but it also feels it is losing influence to China in the region. But the key point is it is not because of China and because of the regional countries. It is because the U.S. policy towards the region. I think that's the key point. So I already say some American analysts, they are saying that the U.S. should reflect its own policy to the region.
What is the U.S. policy in the region that are causing what you're saying now? An example, for instance.
Yes, especially to the country of Honduras. because the biggest concern of the U.S. is migrants from the country to the U.S. because the country is poverty and violence. So the U.S., especially the Biden administration, want to help the country out by giving more money to solve the deep roots reasons. But 1 year passed. The U.S. administration spent too much money in the Ukraine war field. So, but very less money to the country. So this is the key point. And the other is why the President Castro refused to attend the Summit of the Americas in the United States, because it didn't agree with the U.S. sanctions policy towards Venezuela and Cuba. So I think there are many difficulties between the two countries. Yes.
Finally, what exactly, Professor Mahoney, what do you see China seek in that region in Central America and the Caribbean and in Latin America as a whole? Because the United States is fearing that China is competing for influence for that region, which the United States considered to be its backyard. So hands off China. But China is not wasting a minute to expand investment, business cooperation, development cooperation. What is China seeking there?
Well, we do have this narrative of fear-mongering in the United States. We saw this incredibly false story that was published in the Wall Street Journal a few days ago about an alleged Chinese military presence in Cuba that turned out to be false, and even the Department of Defense came out against that. So there is this right wing or this neoconservative or neoliberal movement in the U.S. that fears any sort of entrance of China into the Western Hemisphere. But let's be clear: the U.S. has a military presence in Honduras at the Soto Cano air base of 1,200 to 1,500 troops. But the bottom line is more Chinese investment, more Chinese purchases of Honduran goods. These pose no threats to the U.S. In fact, helping to mitigate poverty there will strengthen the government, help against the gang war, and decrease migration towards the U.S., which is the U.S.'s leading concern when it comes to Honduras. But we are in this, unfortunately, this zero-sum narrative, this new Cold War language that we're hearing.
Yeah, Professor Mahoney, sorry to interrupt. I'm really curious, if the United States wants to compete with China in terms of winning hearts to help people out of poverty, why does the United States not invest in development projects in Latin America?
Well, the United States is having a hard time investing in its own development, its own redevelopment right now. The U.S. is highly polarized. We don't see consistency from one administration to the next in terms of policy towards even the near neighbors of the United States, including Honduras. So I think that Honduras is looking for stability, long-term investment, and that's something that Beijing can provide, certainly through organizations like the BRICS, the NDB, and the BRI.
Finally, Renato, do you see the trend going? We still have 13 countries all over the world, of course, not all in Central America and the Caribbean, but about 9 in that region who are still having diplomatic ties with Taiwan. Do you see similar trend following the Honduras footstep? Keep it short, please, really, 20 seconds if you can.
I think we have a marathon, and along this run, we're gonna see in the next decades big change, and this is a sign. This is a clear sign that will be change, but sometimes some change is gonna head back and then forward, as Brazil did and other nations did.
All right, we are going to leave it there. Many thanks to my guest, Renato Peneluppi, joining us from Wuhan, Mr. Niu Haibin, and Joseph Mahoney joining us from Shanghai. With that, we come to the end of this special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got The Point.